Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Logistics Landscape webinar. We've got a very large audience registered for today's event, and we're going to take just a couple of seconds to allow everyone to get logged in before we begin. Please stand by for just a moment, and we'll get started in just a moment. Okay, let's go ahead and begin. Hello, and welcome to our Logistics Landscape conversation about strategies for defending your network against emerging cyber threats. My name is Michael Willard, and we'll begin our conversation in just a moment, but first I want to cover a few quick housekeeping items. All attendees are in muted mode right now in the webinar, and the session is being recorded. We'll share it with you shortly after it concludes. You can also look for a recording of the webinar in the resources section of our website at MercuryGate.com. It'll be available there later today. Our presenters have a lot of information to share, very timely information, but we are planning to field your questions. That's a big part of the reason we're here, and we're going to do that at the end of the conversation. Just submit those questions anytime using the Q&A feature in the On24 webinar platform. We'll respond to as many of those questions as possible during our broadcast. With that out of the way, it's my pleasure to introduce our industry experts that are joining us today. Chad Hicks is MercuryGate's Chief Information Security Officer. He's been a leader in information technology over 20 years, but for the past decade, his focus is specifically related to information security. Chad is a certified Chief Information Security Officer, a certified Information Security Manager, a certified Cloud Security Professional, and a certified Information Security Professional. Chad, that's a lot of letters after your name there. I'm sure they reflect your expertise in the area. I'm going to go ahead and hand the conversation over to you and let you show up your expertise in driving our webinar today.
Thanks, Michael. Appreciate it. Yeah, there's a lot of letters after my name. I've taken a lot of certifications. You know, cybersecurity is ever evolving, and so you got to stay current. And one of the ways I do that is through the certifications. I am in the middle of a giant rainstorm here on the East Coast. I'm sure many of you are. So if we have any technical issues, I'll be sure to drop back in as quickly as possible. But yeah, I'm happy to be here. Really excited to share some very topical information that is coming out. Especially, we had a recent announcement this morning from Proofpoint that we want to go over on some threats that we see. I've got two folks joining me today from GuidePoint Security. GuidePoint is a partner that MercuryGate leverages to ensure that we stay secure. Really appreciate the relationship with them. And I'm gonna hand it over to Jay Calloway. He can introduce himself, and then off to Lance, who is also joining from GuidePoint.
Yep, thanks, Chad. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me today. My name is Jay Calloway. I'm an account executive at GuidePoint Security. Been in the IT industry for 20 years or so, and been at GuidePoint for almost 7 years. So again, thank you for having me. We appreciate the time today. Lance?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Lance Fisher. I'm a senior security architect. Been working at GuidePoint for about 2.5 years. Been in the industry for quite a while, about 25 years, over 25 years. And I'm kind of the technical side of the GuidePoint relationship on the phone today. So thank you for the time.
Thanks, Lance. So Jay, I'd imagine most people here know who MercuryGate is. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about MercuryGate, but maybe you could give us a quick 500-foot overview of GuidePoint and what you guys may do.
Yeah, for sure. No, I appreciate it. Yeah, so GuidePoint Security is a cybersecurity consulting firm. We have over 1,000 employees in North America, and our biggest differentiator is that of those 1,000 employees, about 65% of them are technical, right? So that's the value that we bring to our customers. You know, like with MercuryGate, we want to be seen as a true partner, right? Not just a vendor. So we strive for customer service and satisfaction, and we now support over 4,000 active customers, globally. We're headquartered in Herndon, Virginia. We've got a bunch of regional offices all over the country, and we were founded in 2011 by cybersecurity industry veterans. A lot of them came from the operational side. So we've got representation from, Publix and Nike and MasterCard and Capital One all over the place. So yeah, that's a little bit about us, Chad. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, appreciate you guys joining. MercuryGate and Guy Putman partnered together even before I joined MercuryGate a couple of years ago, and so we're really happy to have the relationship and excited to have you guys on the call today. We'll jump right into our topic. Why information security is important. I would highlight this: security threats are everywhere. They're constantly evolving. The threat actors are trying to pivot and to come up with new ways as us as defenders try and come up with ways to keep them out. You've probably seen this in the news. Every day it seems like there's a new breach or something else that's going on. And security, I like to view it as not a nice to have, but a requirement. It's a non-functional technical requirement that's kind of built into all the software that we use on a day-to-day basis. Kind of on the topical front, this literally came out yesterday from Proofpoint, so it's not in the slides, and I'll have Michael send it out as part of the follow-up notes. But there's an article for Proofpoint that came out just last night where they were tracking a cluster of activity targeting transportation and logistics companies in North America. Imagine that's some of you folks on the call here, using a variety of different methods, mostly through email and social engineering to deliver threats. So this is something that we need to pay attention to. 10 years ago it was healthcare, fintech, those kind of companies that were being targeted, but now it's everybody, and especially information security in transportation and logistics. If you remember late last year, there was a global entertainment company that experienced a cyber attack. I was actually in Vegas at the time whenever this occurred, and it was super odd to see things like machines turned off, and they lost approximately $100 million, right? So this is a huge cost to companies. And Lance, I know you guys work really closely with some folks that may have experienced some issues in our industry. Is there anything you can share?
Yeah, we had a customer that went through an incident, and I think a lot of times that depending on, like, famously before Home Depot got hacked, he said, "Why would anybody care about us? We sell hammers." But there is a cost for everything, and it was reported in the news quite a bit. I think it was $10 million a day they were losing from being down during that period of time, and we did help them with that. But it was an interesting situation to work with them and kind of still working with them afterwards to clean it up. But I think really that the takeaway there is that it doesn't matter. The hackers can go after anything, and then sometimes they're even going after smaller targets because they know they don't have the level of controls that a bigger business may have.
Yeah, great call, Jay. I know you guys work really closely with some companies to help out. What are some of the areas that you guys focus on to help some of these smaller companies out?
Yeah, so the size of companies that we work with really range from small 50-person shops. I've got a lot of biotech and pharma in the North Carolina area that we work with, on up to some of the largest name brands that you see, Fortune 10 companies, right? And everybody has the same challenges, just at different scale, right? So I think, Chad, we'll talk a little bit about it. I don't want to steal a lot of the thunder from the presentation, but it's everything. I mean, a lot of it is just security hygiene in general, right? Customers come to us and they don't know what what tools they have in their security stack or IT stack, right? We do a lot of tool reconciliation. We do a lot of basic things like, we need a new EDR platform or a new SIM. How does that all tie into the current landscape that we have today? What are the business drivers around it? So it really varies from day to day. And what I love about this job is, like you mentioned earlier, is that, this stuff is changing rapidly, right? The threat actors are very sophisticated, and they take their time, and they're very methodical, right? So we've experienced this a lot of times where our customers have come to us and they said, "Hey, we think we have an issue going on." And, we get on the phone with them and we're like, "Yeah, the next thing that's going to happen is you may get an email, ransom email, or you may get your files encrypted. Let's get through this quickly." So.
That's a good transition for our next slide here, right? As we talk about ransom and the cost of some of these breaches, right? So why is information security important? Security incidents are expensive, right? The average cost is from the latest report from IBM. Somewhere around $4.88 million. That's worldwide. That could be industries large and small. Now, if you're a smaller entity, you may not experience an almost $5 million breach, but if you're at a larger entity, you may be in the hundreds of million dollars, like we talked about before. And this is kind of a rough time, right? If you get to the point where you're talking about a ransom, it's not a great time, right? And there's even some questions that come up then. It's like, okay, well, how do I even pay this ransom? And can you negotiate that? And Lance, I know you guys do a lot of work, on kind of this topic. Maybe you can share some light on what it looks like whenever you're dealing with a security incident and you have to start talking about ransomware and making a payment or not.
Yeah, absolutely. So we oftentimes have contracts in place with the customer, so they'll have a phone number to call, and kind of our team kind of hits the ground, if you will, and starts helping them out. There's a lot that folks don't think about when this happens because they're not expecting this, but simple things like years ago, I worked with a customer that was getting ready to do a formal press release about the fact that they got hacked, and our team went in there and found out that someone had installed kind of like a Minecraft server or something. So a lot of times we start with getting legal counsel involved, ensuring that we're all on the same page, understanding exactly what we have to respond to from a regulatory kind of a perspective, but managing and working through that. A lot of this has to do with just visibility, because it's like anything else. If you think kind of the Sherlock Holmes thing, he's got to have as much data as possible to put together, what actually happened. So that's probably one of the biggest challenges we face, is not having the tools to see what actually happened. But usually has as positive an outcome as possible, but we definitely get them back up and running as soon as we can. So
yeah. One thing I always talk about is you don't want to be having these discussions in the middle of an incident, right? You should have an incident response plan. You need to understand so as an information security leader, making sure I understand what our senior leadership's, risk profile is, what are we going to do? What is our plan? Do we have an incident response retainer? Depending on the size of your org, that may or may not be something that you budget in. But being able to pick up the phone and talk to these guys that are, kind of like the firefighters in this information security world, right? We do everything we can. Fire prevention, keeping things from happening is really the focus of my job. And then the folks that are the firefighters that come in every day, and something as simple as how are we going to pay these folks? They, oftentimes they want Bitcoin. Well, I don't know about you, but most companies don't have a Bitcoin wallet laying around. How are we going to fund that? There's a lot of legal ramifications. The U.S. Department of Justice is pushing really hard on not paying these ransomware vendors because they don't want to incentivize the criminal enterprises, right? But at some point, if your business is down, and that's where you see a lot of these payments occur, we all have a business to run, and it's like, okay, do we continue to stand on the moral high ground, or at what point is the losses so much that we have to do it? The other thing that I found really interesting, I just got back from a couple industry conferences, and when these bad guys or threat actors get into the environment, one of the first things they look for is the cyber insurance policy to figure out how much coverage you have so they know how much money to ask for. These are businesses. I think a lot of people fail to realize. They may think this is the kid in the hoodie that's trying to break into your computer that you see on like a meme on the internet or whatever. And it's not that. These are full-scale criminal enterprises out there. And so it's why information security is so important.
And even before that, sometimes too, Chad, that they will attack your communication channels as well. So we run into that they'll take down somebody's email server. A lot of times their email is attached to your phone, which has your contacts. So we'll run into folks don't even know how to communicate. They don't have out-of-band communication set up. So it's very interesting, some of the situations we get to see, but scary stuff.
Yeah, I guess we'll hop into this next slide here, talking about the threats from all angles. And Jay, I'll hand it to you first, and then maybe if Lance has things to add into it. Anything? I know this is one of your slides you guys talk about often.
Yeah, and I'm not going to read through all of these, but this is really just to show that you're under siege from every direction, right? And it has significant impact to the business. So you can see up there ransomware attacks. You can see AI, which is a huge buzzword now, and people are having a hard time wrapping their head around how to tackle that. Right, phishing, cloud, on-prem even. I mean, I have a customer that had a VPN compromised to their on-premise system recently, right? So they're coming in at every angle. And like Chad said, these are, very professional organizations. They're doing very bad things, obviously, but they're very professional. And, sometimes we find that they're even state sponsored, right? So they have funding and backing behind them. Right. So, yeah, I don't know if Lance, do you want to add anything else to the slide? But really, it's just to show that, you've got to protect yourself from every angle here.
Yeah, I was going to add on to the AI aspect that this was interesting when this kind of really started to take hold at our customers. And initially, they were asking about how do we protect from our data being exposed, where they were finding that folks were uploading confidential data. But one of the ones we had probably about a year and a half ago now is that a hacker was using AI to ask for code to be able to disable the controls they had in place, and it works. And so they were able to shut it off, and they lost, all control of kind of that perspective. And then the other side is organizations are adopting this, trying to, utilize all of the good things that exist in what AI can provide. It also can expose in general. So we're seeing that the capabilities that exist, because they are kind of all encompassing, they call it a large language model. And for it to work properly, it needs to be exposed to all data that's there. And what we're finding is that sometimes that data shouldn't be accessible. So you're finding kind of some interesting use cases, like if someone were to type in the word salary, for an example, and what they get back in an organization that's integrated that. So there are security issues. There's also kind of more broader business potential challenges. So we're seeing some folks kind of pump the brakes and or looking for how do we control what AI can and cannot do in our organization.
And one thing that's really interesting on your slide, and we'll see it later on in some of the other slides, is the two most prevalent attack factors here: phishing and stolen or compromised credentials. And we're seeing, kind of non-native English speakers who are doing some of these attacks. You used to be able to pick it out pretty easy from a phishing email, and using some of the generative AI platforms, it's a little bit harder now because it looks, you can put in an email and say, make this sound like a native English speaker, and all of a sudden it looks a lot better than maybe it did before. I'm going to go ahead and pivot.
One more on that, Chad. We had recently on that one that we had uncovered from the phishing perspective. The bad guys are sending users emails saying, hey, we've got a great job for you, and promising them a ton of money. So people kind of, yes, I want to make more money. They get kind of locked in, give them their social security number to apply for this job. And so it's crazy things.
Yeah, it's amazing what the bad guys will do. I'm going to pivot a little bit here and talk a little bit about SaaS providers and how us as a SaaS provider can protect your information as a MercuryGate customer, credential customer. So information security goes beyond the data center. We've talked a lot about these social engineering attacks, phishing attacks, some of those pieces. And I will say many SaaS providers kind of depend on their hosting provider for their security practices. And that's great. We partner very closely with AWS, and I have a slide on that here and later on. But your security must extend beyond that, right? We can't just stop at the data center layer, because there's attacks that will not be blocked by your data center provider. Social engineering, which we've talked about a lot, there's nothing that your data center provider can produce for you to protect against that. Certainly you can build in, some infrastructure and some things to put layers of protection, but you need to, us as Mercury, as a SaaS provider, we make sure that we invest in things, basic web application attacks, right? Putting a thing like a WAF in front of there, looking for social engineering cues and training our users. And I was talking about that proof point targeted to supply chain that already went out to our users, right? Because we need to teach them and train them on what the bad guys are out there doing. There's a lot of good stuff that you need to kind of implement as part of this. And one of those being strong identity and access management practices, right? So, we look at things like strong passwords. I know this is something near and dear to your heart, right, Lance, is, the third grade one at 1995. I'd love that, longer is better, passphrases. Maybe you want to share a little bit on the on your recommendations around password length and how that works?
Yeah, what we found over the years is it used to be minimum 8 characters, and people would have, different passwords, and then I'd have an iteration. I know I had a user a year ago or long ago, that I knew it was always his wife's name, and I could just guess the last character because I knew it was going to be whatever he just added on to that. But what I think is very powerful for here is that teaching people to use a passphrase is incredibly strong, but easy to remember. So one of the ways, if you understand how hackers are actually going after these passwords, they're not guessing the password as much as when you create a password, it creates what they call a hash. They just look it up. They find it, they got the password, cross-reference that. So when you come up with these interesting phrases, and so you see, like in this example, I was in 3rd grade in 1995. It has uppercase, lowercase, special characters, etc. But if you look at this, how long does it take for them to crack it? It's 92 billion years. So you can create simple passwords like this. We highly suggest folks use a password manager that can kind of help with this and help generate it. But by doing this, it's easy to remember, provides a substantial amount of security, and keeps people from doing I'm going to write it on a Post-it note, stick it under my keyboard, which we still see quite a bit.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of really good stuff here. Kind of from my perspective, and for the MercuryGate customers on the call, using single sign-on to have better control of your applications, that's a huge win. Enabling two-factor authentication with your SSO provider. And this is kind of a baseline expectation, especially for cyber insurance providers. And I think, Jay, you had a little bit to add whenever you're talking about dealing with these cyber insurance providers and how hard they're getting on some of these controls. Is there anything you can add there?
Yeah, I mean, they're looking at these things as table stakes now, right? In order to get coverage or reduce coverage, like from your payment perspective. But yeah, I mean, they're coming in and they're looking at privilege access management. They're looking at single sign-on. They're looking at two-factor or multi-factor authentication, right? Some of these things that customers have not implemented, over the years. But you could get denied coverage if you don't have these things in place, or they could not cover your claim if they find out that you don't have these things in place. So we're seeing the industry change a lot from an insurance perspective, where a lot of these security initiatives and projects are really being driven by cybersecurity insurance requirements today.
Yeah, I mean, they're the ones who know the most, right? Because they're the ones who are having to pay this stuff out. So yeah, just kind of hammer home a couple items here for our MercuryGate customers or potential customers. Enable two-factor authentication with a single sign-on provider. Don't reuse your passwords between your work and private accounts. Then the last one, if you're not using single sign-on, this is a code table config that you can do. Our Boost has kind of a baseline that's based on this graphic here, but you can certainly update that. And I want to make sure that you all, if you're not using single sign-on, that you do have complex passwords enabled in your TMS. Some other things and this kind of goes along with that proof point email that we got this morning, where it's talking about the threat actors. What can I do about it? Number one thing, don't click on suspicious or unexpected emails. The bad guys know this is kind of an easy way in. It is email is the most ubiquitous thing in modern business. Remote first culture, everything's an email. Also, train your users on how to identify phishing attempts. I personally recommend KnowBe4. It's a really cheap solution that can educate your users on phishing attacks. Leveraging a secure mail gateway, in addition to your email provider's native tools. Certainly you may have Gmail or O365, but coupling those with a proof point or an abnormal or Mimecast, pick your poison on that, whichever one of the solutions makes sense for you. That's an area where it really makes sense to invest. And I know this is an area, Jay, that you've talked about. This is a big one where you see initial attack vectors, right?
Yeah, we do. And I think we get so down in the weeds on the day-to-day, and we're very busy, and it's easy for this stuff to slip by. But I think I'm going to say something very simple, just stop and think, right? Take a deep breath. If you don't recognize the email or there's an attachment in it, the easiest thing you can do is pick up the phone and try to call that person, right? I mean, it's just something very simple. We're also seeing a lot of smishing attempts, which are text-based phishing. We get notified at GuidePoint a lot that, our president is not sending you a text and asking for Amazon gift cards. He does not need them. He will never do that, right? But we see it a lot, and it's simple, and some people just click the link in the text, right? So yeah, I think if I had anything else to say here, just taking it back to basics and just slow down and read it. And you can probably identify some areas in a potential phishing email that are red flags.
Yeah, very well stated, Jay. I mean, that hits it home, and a lot of these attacks will be urgent in nature. Hey, Jay, I'm at, in this meeting with this potential client. I need this right now. Click this link, download it, send me this information. So it's very important just to slow down. Like you talked about, we're all very busy. We all have a lot of stuff going on, and how do we make sure that we protect the company? And text messages, phone calls, unsolicited Teams calls, all those are ways that the bad guys are trying to break in. I'm going to pivot and talk a little bit about MercuryGate. You are joining a MercuryGate webinar, so I will share a lot about how we put a lot into practice, a lot of these things that we've talked about today. Most importantly, our program is based on ISO 27001. It's an internationally recognized standard, what I consider to be the most comprehensive security standard out there on the market. This is 114 separate controls that covers people, process, and technology. So not only how do we patch the systems, how do we write secure code, but also, the background checks on new hires and contractors when they come in, and the training that we provide against social engineering. I will say this is not something new. I've been with MercuryGate a little over 2 years, but this dates far back than me. This was first issued in January of 2016. So we're very proud of the fact that we've been doing this for, coming up on 10 years now. So we're very, very happy with the investments that we've made there, and we were recertified annually. So every year in January, they roll around and they come and ask me a bunch of questions. And I don't know, Lance, is this an easy certification that you see a lot of people get, or is this one a bit of a soft? What do you think?
This is impressive. This is a good thing for anyone to have, because it shows the dedication from the organization to their overall kind of perspective on how the importance of security, and to take that seriously. So, and you notice they call out too, it's practices for people and processes as well. So kind of the alternative of that is what we see is organizations that just spend money on technology and don't kind of address, like, what does it take? And you can think of any kind of a example of that, of like buying a door lock for your house, but if you don't lock the door, there's no point in that. So it's training the people, having them understand what this means to the business, what they need to do. So this is a very good thing to have.
Yeah, and we take it a step further. So we have both SOC 1 Type 2 for our TMS and SOC 2 Type 2 for basically everything else, as well as TMS. So this is another independent audit. So depending on the MercuryGate solution that you leverage, we have different audit periods. You can request all this documentation on our trust.mercurygate.com website. This is another independent audit specific to the application or the solution that we're talking about. And they audit us against security, availability, and confidentiality. I'm proud to say that since I've been here, we haven't had a single finding in any of our audits, including our SOC audits. So that's a big win for us, and we're very proud of that. And it kind of goes along with that ISO certification from that perspective. The last thing I'll talk about in our certifications here before we move on to something a little bit more exciting, because I know not everybody enjoys audits as much as I do. We also have a very strong commitment to privacy. We're a member of the EU-US Data Privacy Framework. This was previously known as Privacy Shield. We were joined into Privacy Shield in 2019, and then EU-US Data Privacy Framework was ratified within the last year or so. And we're one of only 2,800 entities worldwide that is a member of this. We are certified in compliance with the EU advisory decision. So, and you can look us up on the Data Privacy Framework website. Basically, what this means is we follow the GDPR recommendations on privacy, making sure that any data you entrust us with is processed accordingly, and that we respect all those things that the GDPR right to be forgotten and those kind of pieces. So something we're very, very proud of. And that, along with our other certifications, kind of demonstrates, I think, from what Lance said, a big commitment from our senior leadership to invest into our security program. I'll talk a little bit about our AWS cloud capabilities. Those of you that are MercuryGate customers and have been for some time, we went through our migration last year, maybe a little bit longer than last year now, where we strategically partnered with AWS. There's a lot of words on the slides. I won't read these in depth. You can certainly feel free to read them. What I want to kind of highlight is our strategic alliance with AWS. So we're an approved solution in the AWS marketplace. And that means that we went through a very stringent review as part of the AWS's processes. Before you can even get listed onto their marketplace, you have to go through a very stringent, I remember it was like 400 question Excel document. And they look at things like how your solution's deployed. Is it scalable? Is it secure? Are you using our best practices? Are you following this model? And it's a very important piece. And not only that, but I also attend a lot of conferences. I went to the AWS security conference. AWS is the only one that has an in-person, the only public cloud provider that has an in-person security summit. And it's a 2-3 day event that moves around every year. And I think that shows kind of AWS as being one of the thought leaders in the security space. And I get to sit down as part of our security relationship with them, with their CISO, and have dinner with them and talk to them about the threats they see, because I like to say they have half the internet. I don't know if that's totally accurate or not, but they certainly have a large portion of the internet that goes through that. And so having that viewpoint and those best practices and the attacks that they are seeing, which basically match with what we've talked about all day today, identity and access management, credential theft, phishing, all those pieces. So having that, kind of reinforcement of where we need to invest our time to protect ourselves is a good part. And I know, Jay, I believe you guys are listed on the AWS marketplace as well.
Yeah, we're an AWS certified partner. We're in the marketplace. You can, if you would like to buy GuidePoint services from marketplace, you can. We can also leverage the marketplace to, help our customers purchase new technologies if they have a certain spend with AWS. And we're also one of the first consulting firms that was AWS certified for security, which is something we're very proud of too. So yeah, it's not an easy task, but we did it, and like MercuryGate, AWS has been a great partner to us.
Yeah, and I'm going to start to wrap up a little bit. I'm not going to wrap up yet, but I'm going to start, as one of my friends says. But how does MercuryGate invest in keeping our platform secure? Well, number one here, we're hosted on industry-recognized cloud providers. AWS is an industry leader. We're very proud of that relationship, as I talked about before. Secondly, and I kind of lead with this, this is the area where we see the most significant amount of attacks is on users, right? So emails, phishing, credential theft, all those are important attack vectors. And so what do we do about that? Our users receive annual security training. Michael can attest to this. He gets an annual training. He also gets a monthly refresher, and we also send targeted phishing tests and track people's completion metrics. Make sure, if somebody's a risky user, maybe they click on a simulated phishing email, they get additional training. They also get additional tests. And so we spend a lot of time and effort making sure that our users are educated on what the threats are out there. And we even have a security teams channel that, like I said, I posted that Proofpoint article on earlier today. Number three, we leverage next generation advanced endpoint protection with machine learning capabilities to protect against zero-day exploits. This is not your AV of yesteryear, and there's a lot of words here. Maybe Lance, you can kind of share a little bit why using next gen AV versus traditional signature-based one is important.
Yeah, for sure. So the kind of what folks are probably used to from years ago, like McAfee and Trend Micro and whatever, they were a signature based, meaning that when a file came in, they just kind of compared it and said, does this look bad to us, yes or no? And if it's no, then it's allowed through. But there's a term called 0 day, which means that it hasn't been seen before, and customers were getting hit with those and then getting infected, et cetera. So really what you're looking at in this next generation is looking at more of the behavior of what's happening. They still kind of have some of that same capability, but this goes well beyond that. So if you look at like understanding what is trying to happen, the methodologies in which hackers typically go after things, and it analyzes that and shuts it down. And then kind of part of that, back to a previous slide on kind of the ransomware, it also gives a tremendous amount of visibility. So when something bad does happen, the folks that are managing these tools can see exactly what it was rather than just kind of guessing. So very, very powerful and very, very prevalent, across the board for organizations at this point.
Yeah, I kind of see it as table stakes, like Jay mentioned. One of the requirements from a lot of the insurance providers now is not using traditional signature-based AV. Number 4 here, we have a dedicated 24/7 security operations center. They monitor these tools, as the guys have kind of hinted before. It's great to have tools, but if you're not monitoring and you're not doing stuff about them, what's the point of even having them, right? So we have a dedicated 24/7 security operations center. They monitor for anomalies, and they can notify our security team should an issue arise. We've got playbooks. We have work streams. We have predefined methods. We have the phone number, the bat phone to the firefighters, as I like to call it. It's literally on my desk here. If we have an issue, we can call in those firefighters to come and help should an issue occur. And then kind of moving on into kind of our key components that we sell, right? So our software, we are a SaaS provider. Our software goes through multiple layers of security review. This includes static testing, dynamic testing, manual pen testing. I like to equate this, for those of you that may not be familiar with the terms, as like crash testing a car before you sell it on the market. We do kind of the same thing with our applications. We want to make sure that they're secure. We run them through a bunch of automated security checks, looking for known vulnerabilities or SQL injection, those kind of pieces, to make sure that they're protected. And what if one of those things is detected? As they mentioned, it's great to have the tools, but do you do anything with it? And I'm very proud to say we have a vulnerability management program, proactively monitors for things like zero-day vulnerabilities. I don't know anyone on this call remembers Log4j. I lost a Christmas to Log4j, so certainly it's one embedded in my mind. So we monitor for those vulnerabilities from all the various tools and technologies, and then we work very quickly to resolve.
So Chad,
go ahead.
I want to say that it's important to notice, like when I see the things that you guys are actively doing, how important they are and how interrelated they are. So like the famous, from kind of the perspective of everyone had heard about the Target attack. They had tools, they were being alerted, no one was doing anything with them. So we look at number 4, that they have a team that's dedicated 24/7. And I think from my perspective, you look at number 5, they're actively testing their software to make sure that before a bad guy even gets access to it, that they're addressing, the issues that they can as they find them. And then it's very programmatic, kind of to number 6. All of these things are kind of interrelated, and you need a team that communicates well together, works well together, and has what they need to provide the levels of security. But this is an awesome slide.
Yeah, we appreciate it. And, we work really hard. As you guys say, the threat actors evolve every day. And so we're just trying to stay one step ahead of them and then being prepared when duty calls, right? So Michael, I think that brings us to the end of our slide deck here. I was wondering if we can go ahead and shift into Q&A. If you guys have questions, put them into the chat. I don't know if we have any.
Yeah, there is a Q&A there, Chad, that I was going to take, if that's okay, from James.
Yeah, good to see you, Jim.
James is, are AI-enabled phones a threat to a company's data security? Simple answer, I would say yes. More complicated answer is it's complicated. So hopefully a takeaway from today's webinar is the level of efforts that we're going through to control the security at MercuryGate. But kind of, we talked a little bit about cyber insurance, and Jay had said that we're kind of seeing this ramp in their awareness and what they're demanding from clients. So the answer is yes, but there's a lot of other things that, like the table stake things, that need to be done before we get to that. So now we're looking at, to have the visibility of the user's phone is a pretty mature perspective on that. So it's a challenge, and I kind of called that out a bit, that AI is a challenge. But from a more mature perspective, and GuidePoint being one of these, like on my phone, I've got a work profile and a personal profile, and the two don't mix. So as an example, if I go into my work email and do a screenshot, I can't copy it. I can't send it anywhere but to my work email applications. So there are ways to address it, but it's typically folks are struggling with other things before they get to that point. But that kind of goes back to what I was trying to say earlier, is AI is kind of raising or elevating concerns that folks hadn't thought of. Like, hey, we're trying to do all these basic security things. Oh, great, now we got to deal with this. But yeah, it's definitely. Sorry, go ahead, Chad.
I was going to say, I think it goes back to DLP, right? So DLP, data loss protection, making sure that you're controlling where your data goes. And then we can go into a whole different thing on BYOD, right? So yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah, and of course, as we know, we're in our questions segment and want to invite our audience to submit questions in the Q&A panel there, as Jim just did, and I appreciate you doing that. And we've reserved time at the end of the session specifically for everyone's questions, so please submit those questions now, and they are coming in quickly. So, guys, I'll throw you the next one, and this looks like this is somebody new in the world, and it says, what is the first thing I should do if I'm just getting started with a cybersecurity program?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of, as we talk about, there's various maturities in the, and where you are as a company, right? So if you're just starting out, I think focusing on those threat areas where it's, phishing attacks, those baseline, just training your users. EDR, we talked about next gen AV. EDR is just another word for that piece. So making sure that you're starting with those. And I don't know, Lance or Jay, you guys probably meet with a lot of people in this area as well.
I think what I would say is understand what regulatory or compliance needs you have too, right? Because if you don't know that, you don't really know where to start, and like Chad said, there's these things that cyber insurance are looking at, like the table stake stuff, EDR, PAM, single sign-on, 24/7 monitoring, right? So I think that's just my 2 cents is really look at cyber as not just technology, right? Look at a cybersecurity program, and we say this all the time. It's probably run through the mud too much, is as people, process, and technology, and you need all 3 of those components to make it successful. And you have to constantly update it, right? You don't just build a program and put it on the shelf and say, hey, we've got it. Just like Chad runs through his ISO and SOC audits every year, we got to keep updating it and keep staying on the cutting edge of these threat actors, because they're evolving quicker than we are sometimes.
Yeah, and I think the other piece that's really important is understanding your business, right? And what your exposure is. Those are all big pieces. The most secure server that you have is one sitting in my closet over there unplugged, right? But that doesn't really provide a lot of business value. So how do you basically make that balance? And depending on what your organization is, what kind of data you process, what your exposure is, all those kind of play into, what kind of controls make sense.
Okay, let's move on to our next question. If this one says, if I'm a small 3PL, maybe with a small budget, what are some practical things that I could do to get my cybersecurity up to par?
Yeah, I think, I kind of hinted at this in the previous answer. Basically, going out and getting a training platform like KnowBe4. There's a million other ones out there that you can start training your users. Getting a baseline, it always starts with asset inventory, right? Make sure you know where all your computers are. That's kind of 101 stuff. Know where your computers are, know where your data are, and then making sure that all of them have coverage with the various AV and tools out there to make sure.
Yeah, multi-factor authentication wherever available is a huge level of security, and I think that's becoming easier for folks to kind of adopt, because we're seeing it in a lot of our consumer apps. Google or Amazon or et cetera, they're now asking for multi-factor authentication. And, we talked about phishing, we talked about how the bad guys may get somebody's credentials, but having that multi-factor aspect where they have to have a device or their fingerprint or a face reader or whatever that is, that adds a huge layer of security. Kind of the caveat there is it kind of needs to be done everywhere. Is it, a weak link on anything we're discussing is the way in, but multi-factor is usually available everywhere, probably maybe even at no cost to some extent.
And we got just a couple more minutes here, guys. Sorry. And I know there's some questions coming in. Of course, cybersecurity is a sensitive topic. So there may be some questions we don't address directly here on the webinar, but we'll follow up with them directly. Guys, if you've got any questions in our audience, please submit those to the Q&A panel. And we still got a couple of minutes to respond to those. But Chad, maybe we can talk about a little bit of a recap. And if any other questions come up during the close, we can address those.
Yep, for sure. So good call out, Lance. I should have mentioned two-factor. That is the number one. That blocks 99% of the identity-based attacks out there, right? So, focus on identity and access management. That's where the threat actors are today. As I mentioned, I just got back from some of the security conferences out in Vegas, and everybody agrees that's the number one attack vector, either trying to steal human accounts or even service accounts, right? So making sure that you're rotating the service accounts or things like that. So strong, complex passwords, never reuse your passwords. Use single sign-on with two-factor, as Lance mentioned. There's a great way to leverage one tool to cover many. Don't click on suspicious or unexpected emails. As the Proofpoint article, and I encourage everybody, we'll send it out afterward to read over how the threat actors are impersonating, somebody asking for remittance, for example, in the middle of a thread, and getting you to click on links and download software, using a secure mail gateway, or even just configuring your native email provider's tools to be tight and to block things that look suspicious. And then the last piece I'll say, and this is kind of a plug for our GuidePoint folks, I really appreciate them joining the call today. Partner with an industry-leading platform. We partner with AWS. We also partner with GuidePoint that use these validated security frameworks, and that can help you to make sure that you get that. I see a question in here that just popped in. Never reuse passwords. So, for example, if you say your password is Chad1234, which is a terrible password, don't use that on multiple websites, for example. So don't use it to log into your TMS and into your Facebook and into, other various tools, because if one of those passwords gets compromised, they can use that to pivot into other tools and technologies, right? So that's a big one there. You want to make sure you have unique passwords, and that's where Lance talked about a password manager. Having unique passwords generated for every site that you visit is a big piece.
Chad, one thing I'll just add here is we have this term in our industry called tabletop exercises. It's just practice, right? And you've got to, as you build these programs and add these tools, you've got to practice this stuff, right? What happens if scenarios, and I think that's a step that's often missed. When companies, at least what we see, when customers are building out security programs, they spend all this money on tools and technology, and then they either don't integrate them, don't get them configured correctly, put them on the shelf. And they don't practice what happens if we did get ransomware. What would happen? Who would we call first? What would be the communication channel? Do we bring in legal? Do we bring in the FBI? Those are things that we have to talk through, because when these things happen, it's hair on fire. I mean, it's not fun, and I think practicing is what makes a good program really evolve.
Lance, I see one on your password hash question there. I'll read it here for the group, and maybe you can answer it. Attackers use lookup tables to find your password's hash. Does salting help with that, and is salting a standard practice? And you may want to start with what salting is.
Yeah, salting is like adding some overall kind of entropy to that hash to change it. And yes, it does absolutely help, but I think the standard practice, I think that's a sticky question. I don't think there's anything that's standard in general with it, but yeah, absolutely. A lot of it has to do too with, where are they being stored? Because we find it's pretty frightening if a bad guy gets access to a machine via a phishing email or whatever, however they end up landing on a machine. A lot of the discussions we're having now are we have almost no visibility on where they're moving, we say east to west, so inside an organization. But if they gain access and there's other methodologies that they can gain that hash to utilize it elsewhere in an organization. So, but yes, the answer is yes. And I don't know that I would say yes, it should be done everywhere, but it's a different discussion.
Yeah, I think that's kind of one of the best practices, and I think ISO has some guidance on this. As part of 27001, there's some guide, and even 27002. So if you're looking for how to build out a security program, highly recommend you reviewing ISO 27001, 27002. If you're a moderately sized organization, that's a big undertaking for a small business, but if you're a moderately sized organization, you can take that and work through those. I see a question in here. How important is SBOM, so that's software bill of materials, in relation to security within the logistics industry? And I'm going to pivot that a little bit. It's important with any software industry. So yes, it is important. You have to know what's in your software. As I mentioned before, asset inventory is kind of the number one step in any of these information security frameworks. And so, making sure that you know what's in there so that when a vulnerability comes out, if you are vulnerable or if you are not. Those are kind of the key topics that if you don't have that kind of that baseline understanding of what your asset inventory looks like, then you're kind of in trouble, right? And if you're dealing with a SaaS provider, they should be kind of managing that through their own audits and stuff. So you probably don't need to manage the MercuryGate SBOM, and probably not going to share it anyway because of intellectual property concerns, right? But having things like a SOC 2, where yes, we validate the vulnerability management programs that exist, and they do monitor and remediate issues as they come up. And then if you're developing software yourself, having that SBOM from a tool, like a SaaS tool, for example, being able to see what's actually inside of there is a good piece.
Okay, yep. Well, we're approaching the end of our time and not really any questions left. So we'll conclude our presentation today, guys. Thank you very much for sharing some of your time with us. A special thanks as well to Chad, Lance, and Jay. Great information, gentlemen.
Yeah, thanks, Lance. Thanks, Jay. Thanks, Jay.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Thank you, guys. We appreciate it.